My name is Madison, and I am 38 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who my family was. I believed blood meant loyalty, that sisters protected each other, and that family always came first. Then my sister Rebecca destroyed my daughter Emma's brand new 16th birthday car in a drunk driving accident and somehow convinced the police that my teenager was the one behind the wheel. The betrayal that followed would shatter everything I believed about family bonds and force me to choose between forgiveness and justice. But before we dive into this family nightmare, I want to know where you are watching from tonight. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like button if you have ever dealt with toxic family drama. Subscribe because this story gets absolutely wild, and trust me, you will want to see how karma finally catches up to the people who think family loyalty means getting away with anything. The morning of June 15th started like any other Saturday. Emma had been counting down the days until she could finally drive the Honda Civic I had saved 3 years to buy for her 16th birthday. She was responsible, mature beyond her years, and had already passed her driving test with flying colors. That car represented freedom for her and peace of mind for me, knowing she could get to her after-school job and activities safely. Rebecca had been staying with us for 2 weeks after another messy breakup left her temporarily homeless. At 41, my older sister had made a career out of bad decisions and burning bridges. She had been drinking heavily since the separation from her latest boyfriend, and I had already found empty wine bottles hidden throughout my house. When I confronted her about it, she promised she was getting her life together and just needed a little more time. That Saturday afternoon, Emma was at work at the local bookstore and I was grocery shopping when my phone exploded with notifications. The first call came from Officer Martinez at the police station. He told me there had been an accident involving my daughter and that I needed to come immediately. My blood turned to ice as I abandoned my cart and raced across town, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived at the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street, the scene was devastating. Emma's beautiful silver Honda was wrapped around a telephone pole, the front end completely demolished. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filled the air, and emergency vehicles were everywhere. But what confused me most was seeing Emma standing on the sidewalk in handcuffs, tears streaming down her face while Rebecca sat in the back of an ambulance with a bandage on her forehead. Officer Martinez approached me with a grim expression. He explained that, according to witness statements and Rebecca's account, Emma had been driving recklessly when she lost control and crashed. Rebecca claimed she had been the passenger and was trying to get Emma to slow down before the accident happened. The officer said Emma was being charged with reckless driving and that Rebecca had insisted on pressing charges because she feared for her safety. Nothing about this made sense. Emma was the most cautious driver I knew. She had never even gotten a speeding ticket, and she certainly would not have been driving recklessly with her aunt in the car. But when I tried to question the inconsistencies, Officer Martinez cut me off. He said Rebecca had already given her statement, there were witnesses who saw the car speeding, and the physical evidence supported the account of driver error. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and trying to understand what had actually happened. Emma maintained her innocence, insisting she had been at work during the time of the accident and had no idea how her car ended up crashed. She begged me to check the bookstore's security cameras, but when I called, the manager said the system had malfunctioned that day and there was no footage available. Rebecca's story kept changing in subtle ways. First she said they had been going to get ice cream. Then she claimed they were running errands for me. When I pressed her on why Emma would have left work early without telling anyone, she became defensive and accused me of calling her a liar. She insisted that Emma had picked her up and was driving aggressively because they had gotten into an argument about Emma's boyfriend. The medical reports raised even more red flags. Rebecca's blood alcohol level was measured at 0.12, well above the legal limit, but she claimed she had started drinking after the accident to calm her nerves. The hospital staff found this unusual, since she had been treated immediately after the crash, leaving no time for post-accident drinking. When I brought this up to the investigating officer, he dismissed my concerns and said Rebecca's statement was consistent with the evidence they had. Emma's employer confirmed she had been scheduled to work until 6 that evening, and her coworkers remembered seeing her there throughout the afternoon. The accident had occurred at 4:30, right in the middle of her shift. But somehow, this timeline discrepancy was overlooked in the official report. Every time I tried to present this information, I was told the case was closed and that questioning the investigation would only make things worse for Emma. The financial devastation was immediate. The car I had worked overtime to afford was totaled. My insurance premiums would skyrocket because of Emma's supposed reckless driving, and I was facing thousands in legal fees to defend her against the charges. Rebecca showed no remorse and actually had the audacity to suggest that this was a learning experience for Emma, about taking responsibility for her actions. That night, as Emma sobbed in her room and Rebecca slept off her hangover in my guest bedroom, I started to piece together what I suspected had really happened. Rebecca had taken Emma's car without permission, driven drunk and crashed it. Then she had somehow manipulated the situation to make Emma take the blame. The question was how she had convinced everyone, including the police, that a teenage girl who was verifiably at work had been the one driving. I spent hours researching similar cases online and discovered that false accusations within families were more common than I had realized. I read story after story of people whose relatives had thrown them under the bus to avoid consequences for their own mistakes. The pattern was always the same. The guilty party would claim to be the victim, manipulate the narrative to their advantage, and rely on family loyalty to prevent anyone from challenging their version of events. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. Rebecca had not just destroyed Emma's car, she had potentially destroyed my daughter's future. A reckless driving conviction would affect Emma's college applications, her ability to get a job, and her insurance rates for years to come. My sister had sacrificed my child's future to save herself from a drunk driving charge, and she expected me to just accept it because we shared DNA. That was the moment I realized that blood meant nothing if it came at the expense of justice. Rebecca had made her choice when she decided to let Emma take the fall for her mistake. Now it was time for me to make mine. I was going to prove what really happened that day, no matter what it cost me or what it did to our family relationships. My daughter deserved better than being a scapegoat for her aunt's latest mess. The next morning I woke up with crystal clear purpose. While Rebecca slept until noon, nursing what she claimed was a concussion but looked more like a hangover, I began my investigation. I had 24 hours before Emma's arraignment, and I was determined to gather enough evidence to expose the truth. My first stop was the accident scene. The telephone pole still bore fresh scars from the impact, and I noticed something the police report had failed to mention. The position of the wreckage suggested the car had been traveling in the opposite direction from where Emma would have been coming if she had left the bookstore. I took dozens of photos from every angle and measured the distance from various landmarks. Next, I drove to Emma's workplace. The bookstore manager, Mrs. Chen, was sympathetic but nervous about getting involved in a legal matter. However, when I explained that her employee was being falsely accused, she became more cooperative. We discovered that while the main security system had malfunctioned, the cash register cameras were on a separate system and had been recording all day. The timestamp clearly showed Emma making a sale at 4:27, just 3 minutes before the accident occurred, across town. Armed with this evidence, I went to the police station and requested to speak with Officer Martinez again. He was less friendly this time, clearly irritated that I was questioning his investigation. When I presented the security footage and pointed out the timeline impossibility, he became defensive. He claimed that timestamps could be manipulated and that Rebecca's eyewitness account was more reliable than security cameras. His dismissive attitude made me realize that this was not about finding the truth, it was about closing a case quickly and moving on. Officer Martinez had already written his report and was not interested in evidence that contradicted it. I asked to speak with his supervisor but was told she was unavailable and that I should contact the district attorney's office if I had concerns about the charges. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator named James Sullivan. He was expensive, but he had experience with family fraud cases and immediately understood the dynamics at play. Within hours, he had identified several inconsistencies in the police report that went beyond the timeline issues. The witness statements were vague and contradictory, the physical evidence had not been properly analyzed, and Rebecca's medical treatment records showed injuries consistent with being a driver, not a passenger. James also discovered something that made my blood boil. Rebecca had a history of drunk driving incidents in 2 other states, including one case where she had tried to blame a family member before eventually pleading guilty. This information should have made the police more skeptical of her claims, but somehow it had not come up during their investigation. While James worked on the legal aspects, I focused on Rebecca herself. I started paying closer attention to her behavior and noticed patterns that confirmed my suspicions. She avoided looking Emma in the eye, became agitated whenever the accident was mentioned, and kept trying to change the subject when I asked for details about what had happened. Most tellingly, she seemed far too eager to forgive Emma for supposedly almost killing her. I also reached out to Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, the one she had been staying with before moving in with us. Marcus was initially reluctant to talk, but when I explained the situation, he revealed that Rebecca had been stealing from him and had taken his car without permission multiple times before their breakup. He said she had a pattern of lying to avoid consequences and had even tried to blame him for damage she had caused to his apartment. The breakthrough came when I was going through Rebecca's belongings looking for anything that might help Emma's case. Hidden in her makeup bag, I found Emma's car keys. Rebecca had claimed that Emma had been driving and had the keys with her when the accident happened, but here they were in Rebecca's possession. When I confronted her about this, she claimed Emma must have given them to her at the hospital, but the hospital records showed no such interaction. That evening, I laid out all the evidence I had gathered and realized I had enough to prove Rebecca was lying. But I also understood that exposing her would mean destroying what was left of our family. Our parents would be devastated to learn that their eldest daughter had tried to frame their granddaughter for a crime she did not commit. Rebecca would likely face criminal charges for filing a false police report, drunk driving, and possibly insurance fraud. For a moment I wavered. Rebecca had always been the troubled one, the sister who needed rescuing and second chances. Our parents had spent decades making excuses for her behavior and bailing her out of various disasters. Part of me wondered if I should just pay for Emma's legal defense quietly and try to make this go away without destroying Rebecca's life completely. Then I looked at Emma, who had barely eaten or slept since the accident, and my resolve hardened. My daughter was facing serious charges that could follow her for years, all because her aunt was too selfish and cowardly to take responsibility for her own actions. Emma had done nothing wrong except trust a family member who had betrayed that trust in the most devastating way possible. I realized that protecting Rebecca would not just be enabling her, it would be teaching Emma that family loyalty meant accepting injustice. It would show her that being the good one, the responsible one, the one who followed the rules, made her the perfect scapegoat when things went wrong. That was not a lesson I was willing to let my daughter learn. I called James Sullivan and told him to compile everything we had found into a comprehensive report. I contacted a criminal defense attorney who specialized in false accusation cases. I even reached out to a local news reporter who had covered similar stories about police investigations that relied too heavily on family member accusations without proper verification. Rebecca seemed to sense that the walls were closing in. She became increasingly hostile and defensive, accusing me of caring more about a car than about family relationships. She reminded me of all the times our parents had helped me when I was a struggling single mother, and suggested that I owed the family loyalty in return. When that did not work, she tried guilt, claiming that her life would be ruined if anyone found out what really happened. But I was done being manipulated. I had spent years watching Rebecca hurt people and then play the victim when faced with consequences. I had enabled her behavior by making excuses and helping clean up her messes, but this time was different. This time she had gone after my child, and that was a line I would not allow anyone to cross, family or not. The next phase of my plan required careful coordination and absolute discretion. I knew Rebecca would try to manipulate the situation if she suspected I was building a case against her, so I had to move quickly while maintaining the appearance of a grieving mother, just trying to help her daughter through a difficult time. My first ally came from an unexpected place. Dr. Patricia Williams, the emergency room physician who had treated Rebecca after the accident, reached out to me after hearing about Emma's charges through mutual friends. She explained that she had been troubled by inconsistencies in Rebecca's injuries and behavior, but had not known how to report her concerns without violating patient confidentiality. When she learned that an innocent teenager was being blamed for the accident, she felt compelled to speak up. Dr. Williams explained that Rebecca's injury pattern was classic for someone who had been gripping a steering wheel during impact, not bracing as a passenger would. The bruising on her chest was consistent with contact with a driver's side airbag, and her hand injuries suggested she had been controlling the vehicle when it crashed. Most significantly, Rebecca had asked repeatedly about her blood alcohol level and seemed relieved when told it was just barely over the legal limit, as if she had been expecting it to be much higher. Armed with this medical testimony, James Sullivan was able to get a court order for the police to reopen their investigation. The judge who granted the order was clearly frustrated that such obvious evidence had been overlooked in the original report. She specifically noted that the timeline discrepancies alone should have prompted a more thorough investigation before charges were filed against a minor. Meanwhile, Emma's defense attorney, Sarah Mitchell, was building her own case from a different angle. She had requested all communication records from the day of the accident and discovered that Rebecca had made several calls to her ex-boyfriend Marcus in the hours leading up to the crash. When subpoenaed, Marcus revealed that Rebecca had called him drunk and crying, begging him to take her back and threatening to do something desperate if he refused. The timestamp of their last conversation was just 20 minutes before the accident occurred. This revelation painted a picture of Rebecca as an unstable, intoxicated woman who had taken Emma's car during an emotional crisis. It explained why she had been driving in the wrong direction from where Emma would have been traveling and provided a motive for her reckless behavior. Marcus also admitted that he had suspected Rebecca was driving when he first heard about the accident, but had not wanted to get involved in legal proceedings. The community response was starting to shift in our favor as well. Emma's co-workers at the bookstore had organized a letter-writing campaign to support her, providing character references and confirming her responsible nature. Her teachers wrote similar letters emphasizing her academic achievements and mature decision-making. Even customers who knew Emma from the bookstore reached out to offer testimony about her character, but the most powerful ally emerged when I least expected it. Rebecca's own daughter, my niece Sophia, called me from college after hearing about the situation through family gossip. Sophia revealed that she had been estranged from Rebecca for 2 years because of similar incidents where Rebecca had tried to blame others for her mistakes. She offered to testify about her mother's pattern of manipulation and dishonesty, providing examples of times when Rebecca had lied to family members to avoid consequences. Sophia's testimony was devastating for Rebecca's credibility. She described incidents where Rebecca had stolen money from relatives and blamed it on house guests, caused property damage while drunk, and claimed it was pre-existing, and even tried to frame Sophia's stepfather for a hit-and-run accident that Rebecca had actually caused. The pattern was clear and consistent. Rebecca would create problems through her poor choices and then manipulate family loyalty to escape responsibility. As the evidence mounted, the pressure on the police department grew intense. A local news investigation had picked up the story, focusing on how a teenage girl had been charged with a crime, while clear evidence pointed to someone else. The reporter had obtained the security footage from the bookstore and was asking uncomfortable questions about why the police had not verified Emma's alibi before filing charges. Officer Martinez was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into his handling of the case. His supervisor, Captain Reynolds, personally reviewed all the evidence we had gathered and was visibly angry about the shortcuts that had been taken in the original investigation. She assured me that the department would fully cooperate with the district attorney's office to ensure justice was served. The psychological pressure on Rebecca was beginning to show. She had stopped leaving the house and was drinking even more heavily than before. She alternated between raging at me for turning the family against her and breaking down in tears, claiming that everyone was conspiring to ruin her life. When I suggested she might want to retain a lawyer, she became paranoid and accused me of secretly recording our conversations. Her behavior became so erratic that I grew concerned for Emma's safety. Rebecca had started making veiled threats about what would happen to people who betrayed family loyalty, and I noticed her going through Emma's belongings when she thought no one was looking. I installed security cameras throughout the house and made sure Emma was never alone with Rebecca. The breaking point came when Rebecca attempted to intimidate Mrs. Chen at the bookstore. She showed up drunk and demanding that the manager retract her statement about Emma's whereabouts during the accident. When Mrs. Chen refused and threatened to call the police, Rebecca became belligerent and had to be escorted from the premises. This incident was captured on the store's security cameras and provided additional evidence of Rebecca's guilty conscience and unstable mental state. James Sullivan used this incident to petition the court for Rebecca to be evaluated for alcohol dependency and mental health issues. The evaluation revealed a severe drinking problem and a personality disorder characterized by an inability to accept responsibility for her actions. The psychologist who conducted the assessment noted that Rebecca showed classic signs of narcissistic personality traits, including a pattern of exploiting family relationships and an inability to empathize with the harm she caused others. By this point, even our parents were starting to question Rebecca's version of events. They had initially supported her out of parental instinct, but the mounting evidence was impossible to ignore. When Sophia shared her own experiences with Rebecca's dishonesty, our mother broke down and admitted she had suspected Rebecca was lying but had hoped the truth would never come out. She apologized to Emma with tears in her eyes, acknowledging that she had failed to protect her granddaughter from her own daughter's destructive behavior. The district attorney's office was now fully committed to prosecuting Rebecca for filing false police reports, drunk driving, and insurance fraud. They offered Emma a complete dismissal of all charges in exchange for her cooperation in the case against Rebecca. The prosecutor explained that this was one of the most clear-cut cases of false accusation they had ever seen, with overwhelming evidence pointing to Rebecca's guilt and Emma's innocence. As I prepared for the final phase of this ordeal, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. I had gone from being a woman who prioritized family harmony above all else to someone who was willing to destroy family relationships to protect justice. I had learned that loyalty without truth was meaningless and that enabling bad behavior in the name of love was actually a form of cruelty. The upcoming trial would be the culmination of everything we had fought for, but I already knew we had won the most important victory. Emma would be vindicated. Rebecca would face consequences for her actions, and our family would finally understand that accountability was more important than unconditional support. The truth was about to set us all free, even if it meant some relationships would never recover. The trial began on a crisp October morning, exactly 4 months after the accident that had turned my family upside down. Rebecca had finally retained a lawyer, a public defender who looked overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against his client. She sat at the defendant's table wearing a conservative outfit that her attorney had clearly chosen to make her appear sympathetic, but her bloodshot eyes and trembling hands told the real story. The prosecution opened with a devastating timeline presentation that made Rebecca's lies impossible to maintain. They showed security footage of Emma at work, phone records proving Rebecca's emotional state before the accident, and medical testimony about injury patterns that proved Rebecca had been driving. The defense attorney's opening statement was weak and unfocused, essentially arguing that this was all a misunderstanding between family members that had gotten out of hand. Emma took the stand first, and I was proud of how composed she remained under cross-examination. She clearly explained her work schedule, her relationship with her aunt, and her confusion when she learned about the accident. When Rebecca's lawyer tried to suggest that Emma was lying to protect herself, Emma looked him directly in the eye and asked why she would risk her future to protect someone who had thrown her under the bus. "Doctor, Williams provided clinical testimony that was absolutely damning for Rebecca's case. She explained in detail how Rebecca's injuries were consistent with being a driver, not a passenger, and described Rebecca's suspicious behavior in the emergency room. The defense attorney's attempts to discredit her medical expertise only highlighted how desperate their position had become. The most powerful moment came when Sophia testified about her mother's history of manipulation and dishonesty. She described multiple instances where Rebecca had blamed family members for her own mistakes, including times when she had stolen money, damaged property, and even falsely accused Sophia's stepfather of domestic violence to gain sympathy during a custody dispute. Sophia's voice remained steady throughout her testimony, but tears streamed down her face as she explained how her mother's lies had destroyed relationships and hurt innocent people. When Marcus took the stand, he revealed the phone conversation he had with Rebecca just before the accident. He testified that Rebecca had been drunk, crying, and making threats about doing something that would make him sorry for leaving her. The timing of this call, combined with the direction Rebecca had been driving, painted a picture of someone who had taken Emma's car in an emotional rage and driven recklessly while intoxicated. The courtroom was completely silent when James Sullivan presented the evidence about Rebecca's hidden criminal history in other states. The prosecution had been granted permission to introduce this information to show a pattern of behavior, and it was devastating. Rebecca had been arrested for drunk driving twice before, had filed false insurance claims, and had even tried to blame a family member for a hit-and-run accident in Arizona before eventually pleading guilty. Mrs. Chen testified about Rebecca's attempt to intimidate her into changing her statement about Emma's whereabouts. The security footage of Rebecca's drunken confrontation at the bookstore was played in court, showing her aggressive behavior and slurred speech. This incident proved that Rebecca knew Emma had an alibi and was trying to suppress evidence that would exonerate her niece. The psychological evaluation was perhaps the most damaging evidence of all. The court-appointed psychologist testified that Rebecca showed clear signs of narcissistic personality disorder and alcohol dependency. She explained that people with these conditions often blame others for their mistakes and manipulate family relationships to avoid consequences. The psychologist noted that Rebecca showed no genuine remorse for the harm she had caused, Emma instead viewing herself as the victim of a conspiracy. When Rebecca finally took the stand in her own defense, it was a disaster. Her attorney had clearly advised against it, but Rebecca's narcissism would not allow her to remain silent while others testified against her. She immediately contradicted several aspects of her previous statements, claiming she could not remember details because of her head injury. When the prosecutor pressed her on the timeline inconsistencies, she became defensive and hostile. The most damaging moment came when the prosecutor asked Rebecca directly why she had never mentioned Emma's work schedule to the police. Rebecca stumbled through several explanations before finally claiming that she had assumed Emma had left work early. When presented with evidence that she had never actually checked with the bookstore, Rebecca became flustered and accused the prosecutor of trying to trick her. Her testimony fell apart completely when she was confronted with the phone records showing her conversation with Marcus. She initially denied being drunk during the call, then claimed she had only had one drink, then finally admitted she might have had more, but insisted it was after the accident. When reminded that the blood test showed she was legally intoxicated at the hospital, she broke down and started crying, claiming that everyone was ganging up on her. The closing arguments were a formality at that point. The prosecution methodically reviewed the evidence, showing that Rebecca had taken Emma's car without permission, driven drunk, crashed it, and then manipulated the situation to blame her teenage niece. They emphasized that this was not just a case about a car accident, but about an adult woman who was willing to destroy a child's future to save herself from consequences. Rebecca's defense attorney made a half-hearted plea for mercy, suggesting that Rebecca's alcohol problem and mental health issues should be considered mitigating factors. He argued that she had been in an emotional crisis and had made poor decisions, but that she did not deserve to have her life ruined over a moment of weakness. His argument fell flat when he could not explain why that moment of weakness had extended to months of allowing Emma to face false charges. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts: drunk driving, filing false police reports, insurance fraud, and child endangerment. The judge's sentencing was swift and decisive. Rebecca received 18 months in prison, 5 years, probation, mandatory alcohol treatment, and a 10-year license suspension. She was also ordered to pay restitution for all of Emma's legal fees and the cost of the destroyed car. As the bailiff led Rebecca away in handcuffs, she turned back toward our family section of the courtroom. For a moment, I thought she might finally apologize or show some acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Instead, she looked directly at me and mouthed the words, "I will never forgive you for this." Even in defeat, even facing prison time for her lies, Rebecca remained convinced that she was the victim and that I had betrayed her by choosing truth over family loyalty. Emma squeezed my hand as we watched Rebecca disappear through the courthouse doors. The relief on my daughter's face was overwhelming, but I could also see the sadness there. Despite everything Rebecca had done to her, Emma had still hoped for some kind of reconciliation or explanation that made sense. Instead, she had learned a harsh lesson about how some people will sacrifice anyone, even children, to protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. The weeks following Rebecca's conviction were both liberating and devastating. Emma's charges were formally dismissed, and the court issued a public apology for the initial mishandling of the case. Officer Martinez was terminated from the police force after an internal investigation revealed that he had failed to follow basic procedures and had shown bias in favor of adult testimony over verifiable evidence. Captain Reynolds personally delivered Emma's expunged record and assured us that reforms were being implemented to prevent similar injustices. The local news coverage of the trial had turned Emma into something of a folk hero for wrongfully accused teenagers. She received letters of support from young people across the country who had faced similar situations with adults who had tried to manipulate the system against them. A legal advocacy group even offered her a scholarship for college, recognizing her courage in standing up for the truth, despite pressure to accept blame for the sake of family peace. But the victory came at a tremendous personal cost. Our extended family was completely fractured, with relatives choosing sides based on their own relationships with Rebecca and their willingness to accept uncomfortable truths. My parents, who had initially supported Rebecca out of misguided loyalty, were now devastated by the realization of what their eldest daughter had become. My mother blamed herself for enabling Rebecca's behavior over the years, while my father retreated into angry silence about the whole situation. The most heartbreaking casualty was my relationship with Rebecca's younger children, my nephew and my other niece, who were too young to understand why their mother was in prison. They only knew that their Aunt Madison had helped put her there, and their father's family had poisoned them against us with stories about betrayal and revenge. Despite my attempts to maintain contact, it became clear that Rebecca's conviction had cost me access to children I had helped raise and loved deeply. Rebecca's ex-husband Tom was furious about the situation, despite the fact that he had been divorced from Rebecca for 3 years. He blamed me for destroying his children's stability and claimed that I should have handled the situation privately within the family. When I pointed out that his ex-wife had been willing to send his stepdaughter to juvenile detention to save herself, he accused me of being vindictive and caring more about being right than about the welfare of the children involved. The financial aftermath was also complicated. Rebecca's restitution payments were minimal since she had no significant assets or income, and her prison sentence meant she would not be able to work for over a year. I had spent nearly $20,000 on legal fees and private investigation costs, money I had been saving for Emma's college education. While the court had ordered Rebecca to repay these expenses, everyone involved knew that she would never have the means to do so. Emma struggled with her own complex feelings about the outcome. While she was relieved to be vindicated and grateful that the truth had come out, she also felt guilty about Rebecca's imprisonment. She had nightmares about the accident and worried that she was somehow responsible for destroying our family relationships. Despite reassurances from her therapist, and from me, she carried a burden of guilt that no 16-year-old should have to bear. The insurance situation became another ongoing battle. Rebecca's drunk driving conviction meant that her insurance company denied coverage for the accident, leaving my insurance to cover the damages. My premiums increased significantly, and I had to fight for months to get them to remove the reckless driving claim from Emma's record. The insurance investigator admitted that they had relied too heavily on the initial police report without conducting their own investigation into the circumstances. Rebecca's time in prison was marked by continued manipulation and attempts to play the victim. She wrote letters to family members, claiming that she was being persecuted for a mistake and that I had orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy against her. She insisted that she had only tried to protect Emma by claiming responsibility for the accident, and that everyone had misunderstood her intentions. These letters showed no acknowledgement of the harm she had caused or acceptance of responsibility for her actions. The prison counselors who worked with Rebecca reported that she was resistant to treatment for both her alcohol dependency and her underlying psychological issues. She attended mandatory sessions but showed no genuine engagement with the process of understanding how her choices had affected others. Instead, she focused on planning her appeal and maintaining her innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. Meanwhile, Emma was thriving in ways that surprised everyone who knew about our ordeal. The experience had given her a profound appreciation for justice and truth that shaped her academic interests and career goals. She decided to study criminal justice in college with the intention of becoming a victim's advocate, specifically focusing on cases where family members victimize each other. She said that she wanted to help other young people who found themselves in situations where adults were willing to sacrifice them to protect themselves. The community response continued to be overwhelmingly supportive of Emma and critical of the initial police investigation. The bookstore where Emma worked received so much positive attention that Mrs. Chen was able to expand her business and hire additional staff. She offered Emma a management position for after school and weekends, giving her valuable work experience and helping to rebuild the college fund that had been depleted by legal expenses. My own healing process was complicated by the ongoing family drama and financial stress. I had to start therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering that my sister was willing to destroy my daughter's future for her own convenience. The therapist helped me understand that my choice to pursue the truth had been necessary and correct, but I still struggled with grief over the loss of family relationships that I had valued. The legal system's response to our case led to broader reforms in how family-involved incidents were investigated. The police department implemented new protocols requiring independent verification of alibis and witness statements, especially in cases involving family members. Officer Martinez's termination sent a message that sloppy police work would not be tolerated, particularly when it resulted in false charges against minors. As Rebecca's release date approached, I had to make difficult decisions about what our relationship would look like going forward. She had never apologized or acknowledged the harm she had caused, and her letters from prison suggested that she still viewed herself as the victim of our family's betrayal. I knew that protecting Emma and maintaining my own peace of mind would require strict boundaries that Rebecca would probably never accept. The insurance company finally settled our claim and even issued a formal apology for their initial handling of the case. They revised their procedures for investigating family-involved accidents and agreed to remove all negative marks from Emma's driving record. This victory felt hollow compared to everything we had lost, but it was another step toward restoring the life that Rebecca's lies had temporarily destroyed. 2 years have passed since that devastating June afternoon that changed everything, and I can honestly say that our lives are better now than they were before Rebecca's betrayal. Emma is finishing her senior year of high school with a full scholarship to study criminal justice at the State University. She has become an advocate for wrongfully accused teenagers and has spoken at conferences about the importance of thorough investigations in family-involved incidents. Her confidence and maturity have grown tremendously through this ordeal, and I am proud of the young woman she has become. Rebecca was released from prison 6 months ago, but true to form, she has learned nothing from the experience. She contacted me immediately upon her release, not to apologize or make amends, but to demand that I help her get back on her feet financially. When I declined and maintained the boundaries I had established, she launched a social media campaign, claiming that I had destroyed her life out of spite and jealousy. Her posts were so delusional and vindictive that several family members who had previously supported her finally saw her true nature. The most surprising development has been the strengthening of my relationship with my parents. Initially devastated by Rebecca's conviction, they have spent the past 2 years in therapy learning about enablement and healthy boundaries. My mother has apologized repeatedly for the years she spent making excuses for Rebecca's behavior, and has committed to building a different kind of relationship with her remaining children and grandchildren. My father has become Emma's biggest supporter, proud of her courage in standing up for the truth despite family pressure. Sophia has become like a sister to me, and she and Emma have developed a close bond despite their age difference. Sophia graduated college last year and is now working as a social worker specializing in family dysfunction and abuse cases. She says that watching her mother's trial gave her the clarity she needed to pursue a career, helping families break cycles of manipulation and dishonesty. She has been completely no contact with Rebecca since the conviction, and has no plans to change that. The financial recovery took longer than expected, but we managed to rebuild what was lost. Emma's scholarship covered most of her college expenses, and the speaking fees from her advocacy work helped replace the money we had spent on legal fees. I was even able to buy her a new car for graduation, a symbolic replacement for the one Rebecca had destroyed. This time I made sure Rebecca had no access to the keys or any information about the vehicle. Our chosen family has expanded in beautiful ways. Mrs. Chen has become like a grandmother to Emma, and several of the families from Emma's advocacy work have become close friends. We have learned that blood relationships are not automatically more valuable than chosen relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. The people who stood by us during the trial have proven themselves to be our real family, while some blood relatives showed their true colors through their willingness to sacrifice justice for comfort. Emma's therapy journey has been remarkable to witness. She initially struggled with guilt about Rebecca's imprisonment and worry about being responsible for family discord. Her therapist helped her understand that she was a victim, not a perpetrator, and that holding adults accountable for their actions is not betrayal. Emma now helps facilitate support groups for teenagers who have been scapegoated by family members, and her insights have helped dozens of young people navigate similar situations. The legal reforms that came out of our case have had a broader impact than I ever expected. The protocol changes in police investigations have prevented several similar cases of wrongful charges against minors. Officer Martinez's termination sent a clear message about the importance of thorough investigation over convenient conclusions. Captain Reynolds has become a vocal advocate for these reforms and has spoken at law enforcement conferences about the importance of verifying alibis and challenging family narratives that seem suspicious. My own healing has been a gradual process of learning to trust my instincts and prioritize truth over peace. I had spent years enabling Rebecca's behavior in small ways, making excuses for her drinking, lending her money I knew she would not repay, and minimizing the impact of her lies on other family members. The therapy process helped me understand that my desire to keep the family together had actually enabled the dysfunction that nearly destroyed my daughter's future. Rebecca's current situation serves as a perfect example of how people who refuse to accept responsibility for their actions continue to create chaos in their lives. She has been arrested twice since her release for alcohol-related incidents and has burned through every family relationship except with her youngest children, who are still too young to understand her manipulation. Her social media rants about our family have become so unhinged that most people who read them can see her instability clearly. The insurance settlement was finally completed last month, and the company has used our case as an example in training materials for their investigators. They now require independent verification of police reports in family-involved accidents and have hired former police detectives to conduct their own investigations when family narratives seem suspicious. This change has probably prevented dozens of innocent people from being wrongfully blamed for accidents they did not cause. Emma's college plans include a double major in criminal justice and psychology, with the goal of becoming a prosecutor who specializes in false accusation cases. She wants to prevent other families from experiencing what we went through and ensure that people like Rebecca face appropriate consequences for their manipulation and dishonesty. Her professors have already noted her exceptional understanding of family dynamics and victim advocacy skills she developed through our ordeal. Looking back, I realized that Rebecca's betrayal was actually a gift in disguise. It forced our family to confront unhealthy patterns that had been developing for decades and gave us the opportunity to build something better based on honesty and mutual respect. We lost some relationships that we thought were important, but we gained a deeper understanding of what real family loyalty looks like. The most important lesson from this experience is that protecting someone from consequences is not the same as loving them, and that enabling destructive behavior in the name of family loyalty actually harms everyone involved. Real love sometimes requires difficult choices and uncomfortable truths. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the natural consequences of their actions, even if they hate you for it. I want to hear from all of you who have been through similar family betrayals. Have you ever had to choose between family, loyalty, and justice? How did you handle relatives who expected you to cover for their mistakes? Share your stories in the comments below because these experiences need to be talked about openly. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories that show how truth and justice can prevail even in the most complicated situations. Share this video with anyone who has dealt with toxic family dynamics, because sometimes knowing you are not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for being part of this community where we support each other through family challenges, and remember that choosing truth over comfort is always the right decision, even when it costs us relationships we thought we could not live without.